The mysterious encounter. Ethan was an ordinary human engineer stationed on an alien colony far from Earth. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect anything exciting to happen. The colony, a sprawling mix of strange alien architecture and human-made structures, was a peaceful hub where different species coexisted. Ethan's job involved fixing machines and upgrading systems. Nothing thrilling, just routine work. But that night, everything changed. The sun had set hours ago, casting the colony into darkness. Only the soft glow of alien bioluminescent plants lit the streets. Ethan was in his workshop, tinkering with a faulty generator, when he heard a sudden, frantic knocking at the door. It was loud, desperate, and completely out of place in the usual calm of the colony. Frowning, Ethan stood up, wiped his hands on his worn-out jumpsuit, and went to open the door. What he saw made him freeze. Standing there was a tall alien couple. Their skin shimmered faintly under the light, a deep shade of iridescent blue that marked them as members of the Zerathian species. Their large, round eyes were filled with panic. The male's hands trembled as he held them out in a pleading gesture, while the female's gaze darted around nervously, as if someone might be watching. "Human," the male Zerathian gasped in a trembling voice. "Please, help us." Ethan blinked, his mind racing. It wasn't unusual for aliens to seek human help on occasion. Humans were known for their creativity and problem-solving skills. But this level of desperation was something he hadn't seen before. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, stepping aside to let them in. The aliens quickly entered, glancing over their shoulders as if they feared being followed. Once inside, the female Zerathian spoke, her voice breaking with emotion. "Our daughter. She's dying. No one here can save her." Ethan's stomach dropped. He wasn't a doctor. What could they possibly want from him? "I'm sorry to hear that," Ethan said carefully, "but I'm not a medical expert. You need to take her to the colony's hospital." "We already tried," the male alien said, his voice rising in despair. "The doctors don't know what to do. They've given up. But we've heard humans can do the impossible." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, unsure how to respond. Humans had a reputation for solving problems in unconventional ways, but this sounded far beyond anything he could handle. "I don't know what you've heard, but I'm just an engineer. Machines are my specialty." "Not." "Please," the female interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "We'll give you anything you want. Anything. Just help her. You're our only hope." The weight of their words settled on Ethan. These were parents, willing to do whatever it took to save their child. He couldn't just turn them away, even if the situation seemed hopeless. He let out a slow breath and nodded. "All right. I'll see what I can do." But no promises. The relief on their faces was immediate and heart-wrenching. The male Zerathian placed a trembling hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Ethan grabbed his jacket and followed the couple out into the night. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hum of colony life absent. As they hurried toward the Zerathians' home, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation was off. Why would alien doctors give up so easily? And why were the parents so insistent that only a human could help? When they arrived at the house, Ethan's unease deepened. The home was small but impeccably clean, with glowing crystals embedded in the walls. In the center of the main room lay a young Zerathian girl on a floating bed. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old in human terms. Her skin, once the vibrant blue of her species, had faded to a pale, sickly hue. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was shallow. "This is Lyra," the female Zerathian said, kneeling beside the bed and brushing a hand gently over her daughter's head. "She's been like this for 3 days. No one knows why." Ethan stepped closer, studying the girl. She looked peaceful, almost as if she were simply sleeping. But the tension in the room told him this was far from normal. He glanced at the parents. What happened before she got sick? The couple exchanged a hesitant look before the male spoke. She went near the ruins. Ethan's brows furrowed. The ruins were an off-limits area on the edge of the colony, ancient structures left behind by an unknown civilization. The Zerethians had strict rules about staying away from them. Why would she go there? We don't know, the mother whispered, her voice trembling. She said she heard something, a voice calling her. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He didn't believe in ghost stories or ancient curses, but there was something undeniably eerie about the ruins. And now, a young girl's life hung in the balance. As he stood there, staring at Lyra's fragile form, Ethan felt a surge of determination. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but he couldn't walk away now. The alien parents were right about one thing. Humans had a knack for finding solutions, even in impossible situations. And he was going to prove it. The hidden condition. Ethan stayed by Lyra's bedside for hours, carefully observing the young Zerethian girl. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic pattern, but there was something unnatural about it, like her body was functioning on autopilot, disconnected from her mind. The alien parents sat quietly in the corner, their hands intertwined as if clinging to each other for strength. The silence stretched on until Ethan finally broke it. She doesn't look physically hurt. This seems different. The male Zerathian, who introduced himself as Keeler, shifted nervously. His gaze flickered to his wife, Sira, before answering. It isn't physical. At least, not in the way you'd expect. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Keeler hesitated for a moment, then stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. He retrieved a small glowing device that pulsed softly in his palm. It resembled a smooth crystal, but faint tendrils of light swirled inside it. Keeler held it out toward Ethan. This is her neural scan from yesterday, Keeler explained. We had a specialist examine her. They said her brain activity was unusual. Ethan took the crystal carefully, feeling the warmth radiating from it. He raised a brow. Unusual how? She isn't asleep, Ethan. Her mind isn't resting. Keeler's voice was low, almost a whisper. It's stuck, trapped somewhere. She's caught in an endless loop of thought, but none of our doctors understand why. Ethan's grip tightened on the crystal as he glanced back at Lyra. The idea of being mentally trapped, unable to wake up, sent a cold shiver down his spine. He carefully placed the crystal on the table. Why didn't anyone tell me this earlier? He asked, his voice edged with frustration. We didn't think you'd stay if you knew how complicated it was, Sira admitted softly. But you're our only hope. Humans process things differently. Your minds are adaptable. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. I'm not a mind reader. I fix machines, not brains. Keeler stepped closer, desperation flickering in his eyes. Please, Ethan. We wouldn't ask if we had another choice. Ethan exhaled slowly. There was no walking away from this. He couldn't leave Lyra like this, no matter how impossible it seemed. I'll try, Ethan said finally, his tone firm. But I need to understand exactly what happened. You mentioned the ruins. What else do I need to know? Keeler exchanged another nervous glance with his wife. This time, it was Sira who answered. The ruins, they're dangerous. We never go near them. But Lyra said she heard something coming from there. She wandered too close. Ethan frowned. He'd heard the rumors about the ruins since he first arrived on the colony. Ancient structures buried beneath the sand, built by a species long gone. No one knew much about them, and the colony's leaders strictly prohibited exploration of the area. You think whatever's out there did this to her? Ethan asked. We don't know. Keeler's voice trembled slightly. But it's the only explanation we have. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, staring at the sleeping girl. I need to see those ruins. No. Sarah's sharp voice startled him. She rose quickly, shaking her head. You can't. The colony leaders forbid it. Then how am I supposed to help? Ethan challenged. Keeler sighed deeply. There's more, he admitted reluctantly. The colony leaders know something. They've warned us. Interfering with whatever lies in the ruins could bring disaster. Ethan narrowed his eyes. So they know what's going on, and they're keeping quiet about it. It's not that simple, Keeler replied. There are things on this planet that can't be explained by science. Sometimes it's safer to leave them alone. Ethan pushed off the wall, his patience wearing thin. I don't believe in curses or mysterious forces. Something made Lyra sick, and I'm going to find out what. Before Keeler or Syrah could stop him, Ethan turned and grabbed his jacket. I'll be back, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Keep her stable until then. As Ethan stepped out into the cool night air, he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The colony streets were deserted, but in the distance, he could see the faint outline of the ruins under the pale glow of the twin moons. He had no idea what he was walking into, but one thing was clear. Something out there had taken hold of Lyra's mind. And Ethan wasn't going to stop until he found out why. Ethan digs deeper. The ruins weren't far from the colony, but as Ethan approached, the air around him seemed to grow heavier. The lights of the settlement faded behind him, and the faint hum of alien technology was replaced by an eerie silence. Even the wind had stilled, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Ethan's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the jagged shapes of ancient stone structures. The ruins stretched out ahead, like the skeletal remains of a forgotten civilization. Towering spires, cracked and worn by time, jutted from the sand. Strange carvings lined the walls, symbols that twisted and shifted under the light as if they were alive. Ethan knelt near one of the pillars, brushing his fingers over the engravings. The texture was rough and cold, but there was something else beneath the surface, something pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. He frowned. This place shouldn't feel alive, he muttered to himself. As he rose to his feet, Ethan noticed a small footprint pressed into the sand near the edge of the ruins. His heart quickened. The footprint was small, too small to belong to anyone but Lyra. She really was here, Ethan whispered, crouching to study the print closer. It led deeper into the ruins, disappearing around the corner of a crumbling wall. Ethan followed the trail, moving carefully through the narrow passageways. Every step he took echoed softly, as if the ruins themselves were listening. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, Ethan pressed on. If Lyra had been drawn to this place, there had to be a reason. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. His breath misted in front of him, and the faint hum he'd felt earlier grew louder. It wasn't just the ruins. Something beneath the surface was generating that strange energy. After several minutes of walking, Ethan stepped into a wide chamber. The space was circular, with walls lined and spiraling symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. In the center of the room stood a large crystalline structure. It pulsed gently, casting soft blue light across the chamber. Ethan's eyes widened. What is this? He stepped closer, reaching out to touch the crystal. The moment his hand brushed the surface, a surge of energy shot through his body. His vision blurred, and for a brief second, Ethan wasn't in the ruins anymore. He stood in a vast field under a sky filled with swirling stars. In the distance, he saw Lyra, standing alone and gazing up at the sky. Her form flickered like a mirage, and no matter how much Ethan tried to call out, his voice made no sound. Before he could reach her, the vision shattered, and Ethan found himself back in the ruins, gasping for breath. What the hell was that? He whispered, staring at the crystal. The energy pulsing from the structure slowly faded, but Ethan's heart was still racing. That vision. He was sure it wasn't his imagination. Lyra's mind was somehow linked to this place. As Ethan gathered himself, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He spun around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. It was Keeler. The Zarathian father's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. You shouldn't be here, Keeler said urgently, stepping into the chamber. This place. It's dangerous, Ethan. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, still trying to steady his breathing. I don't care how dangerous it is. I just saw Lyra. She's connected to this crystal somehow. Keeler's eyes darted to the glowing structure, and he visibly tensed. You touched it. Ethan nodded. Yeah. And I saw her. I think her mind is trapped here. This place isn't just ruins. It's something else. Some kind of machine. Keeler swallowed hard. You don't understand. This isn't just a machine, Ethan. It's a remnant of the builders. Ethan's brow furrowed. The builders? Keeler nodded grimly. The ancient species that created this colony long before we arrived. No one knows what happened to them, but their technology still lingers beneath the surface. We avoid these places. There are stories of people disappearing, their minds lost to the ruins. Ethan's heart sank, and Lyra was drawn here. Somehow, this thing pulled her in. Keeler took a cautious step closer, his voice trembling. If her mind is trapped, then there may be no way to bring her back. Ethan shook his head firmly. No, I'm not giving up on her. I need to understand how this thing works. There has to be a way to reverse whatever's happening to her. Keeler hesitated but finally nodded. There's one more thing you should know. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What is it? Keeler's voice dropped to a near whisper. You're not the first human to come here. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Another human visited these ruins months ago. He was a researcher studying the ancient technology. He claimed he could communicate with it, but one night he disappeared, right here, in this very chamber. Ethan exhaled slowly. Great, and no one thought to warn me about this earlier. We didn't think it would happen again, Keeler admitted, his face filled with regret. Until Lyra. Ethan clenched his fists, glancing back at the crystal. I'm not leaving her behind, Ethan said firmly. I need to find a way to reach her, even if it means going deeper into this. Keeler's expression darkened, but he didn't argue. I'll help however I can, Keeler said quietly. But we must be careful. There are forces here that even humans can't fully control. Ethan nodded, his determination unwavering. Whatever secrets these ruins held, he was going to uncover them. For Lyra's sake, and maybe for his own. A dangerous gamble. Ethan paced outside the Zerethian home, his mind racing. The ruins had shown him something that defied logic. Lyra's presence in that vision wasn't a coincidence. She was trapped, and whatever force held her there wasn't going to let go easily. But how could he reach her again? Behind him, the door creaked open, and Keeler stepped out, his expression heavy with exhaustion. Ethan, he said quietly, you've done enough. No one expects you to risk more. Ethan turned sharply, shaking his head. She's still in there, Keeler. I saw her. Keeler's eyes softened, but there was hesitation in his voice. The colony's leaders have forbidden further interference with the ruins. They're afraid. If you push too far, you might trigger something worse. Ethan exhaled, the frustration building in his chest. That's easy for them to say. It's not their daughter lying in that bed. Keeler lowered his gaze, guilt flickering across his face. Ethan's words hung between them for a long moment before the Zerethian father finally spoke. There might be another way, Keeler said reluctantly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. I'm listening. Keeler glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to overhear. There's a device, an ancient one. The builders left it behind, but it was incomplete. The colony hid it deep beneath the medical wing. It's said to link minds directly to the ruins. But it's dangerous. No one who's used it has ever come back whole. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A neural link. Keeler nodded. The process is risky. If your mind fails to return, your body. His voice trailed off. Ethan didn't need to hear the rest. He understood the risks. But this was the first real lead he'd had. I need to use it, Ethan said firmly. No, Keeler said quickly, stepping forward. Ethan, this could kill you. Or worse, leave you like Lyra. Ethan met Keeler's eyes with unwavering determination. I'm not letting her die. If this is the only chance, I'll take it. Keeler's shoulders sagged. After a long pause, He finally nodded. "Follow me." The colony's medical wing was quiet as Keeler led Ethan through a hidden passage behind one of the storage rooms. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls narrowing until the hallway opened into a small circular chamber. In the center of the room stood a strange chair, curved and sleek, unlike any technology Ethan had seen before. Metallic bands looped around the headrest, and small tendrils of light pulsed along its frame. A control console sat to one side, covered in symbols Ethan couldn't read. Keeler walked to the console, brushing dust from its surface. "This is the only link we have left to the Builder's technology," he said. "If you enter the neural state, you'll connect to whatever is holding Lyra. But there's no guarantee you'll find her." Ethan stepped toward the chair, running his hand over the smooth surface. "I'll find her," he said quietly. Keeler hesitated but eventually activated the console. The machine whirred softly, the bands around the chair glowing faintly. Ethan sat down, feeling the cold metal press against his skin. Keeler adjusted the bands around Ethan's head, locking them into place. The tendrils hummed, and a soft vibration ran through the chair. Keeler stood beside him, his hand hovering over the activation switch. "Ethan, if you sense anything wrong, anything, signal me. I'll pull you out." Ethan nodded, gripping the armrests tightly. "Let's do it." Keeler hesitated for only a second before pressing the switch. The world around Ethan dissolved in an instant. He found himself standing in a vast, empty expanse, nothing but a black void stretching endlessly in all directions. His footsteps echoed as if he were walking on glass. The only source of light came from faint, glowing threads that hung in the air like veins pulsing softly. Ethan followed the threads, each step pulling him deeper into the strange, ethereal space. As he moved, he began to hear whispers, soft, distant, and unintelligible. "Lyra," Ethan called, his voice echoing in the emptiness. The whispers grew louder, shifting and twisting around him. The glowing threads flickered, and in the distance, he saw a figure standing alone. It was Lyra. She stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the horizon of the void. Ethan quickened his pace, closing the distance between them. "Lyra, it's me, Ethan." She didn't respond. Her form flickered slightly, like a ghost on the edge of reality. As Ethan reached out to touch her shoulder, the ground beneath him trembled. Shadows pooled around Lyra's feet, rising and coiling like living tendrils. Ethan instinctively pulled back as the shadows formed into towering figures with glowing eyes. They circled Lyra protectively, preventing Ethan from getting closer. "I'm not here to hurt her," Ethan said cautiously. "Let me take her home." The shadow figures didn't move. They stood silently, watching him. Ethan clenched his fists. He wasn't about to back down. "Listen to me. She doesn't belong here." Ethan's voice echoed through the void. "I'm taking her back, whether you like it or not." The shadows hissed, but as Ethan stepped forward, they began to retreat. Slowly, the tendrils unwound from around Lyra. Her flickering form grew more stable, and for the first time, her eyes shifted to meet his. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here," Ethan said, smiling faintly. "Let's go home." Lyra took a hesitant step forward, and as their hands met, the void around them shattered. Ethan's eyes shot open, gasping for air as the neural bands retracted. Lyra's parents stood beside him, tears streaming down their faces. "She's awake," Keeler whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Ethan's gaze flickered to Lyra, lying in the next room. Her eyes were open, and for the first time in days, she was smiling into the unknown. Ethan's breath was still heavy as he sat up, the neural bands releasing from his head with a faint hiss. His heart pounded in his chest, but his eyes never left Lyra. She lay on the bed across the room, her pale blue skin illuminated by the soft glow of the medical monitors. Her eyes fluttered open and closed, like she was on the edge of waking. Keeler and Syrah knelt by her side, whispering softly in their native tongue. Relief washed over their faces, but Ethan knew it wasn't over yet. Lyra's body was here, but part of her mind still lingered in that strange void. "She's stable," Syrah said, wiping tears from her eyes. "But she's not fully awake." Ethan rubbed his temples, still feeling the lingering static from the neural connection. "She's close. I could feel it. But something's holding her back." Keeler's gaze shifted nervously. "The shadows." Ethan nodded. "Yeah. They weren't aggressive, but they weren't friendly either. I don't think they're going to let her go that easily." Syrah's hands trembled as she brushed Lyra's hair back. "What are they?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, recalling the vision. "I'm not sure, but I think they're part of whatever ancient technology the builders left behind. Some kind of guardian, maybe. They weren't trying to hurt Lyra. I think they were protecting her from something else." Keeler frowned. "Protecting her? From what?" Ethan hesitated, trying to find the right words. "From herself, maybe. She wasn't scared. It was like she wanted to stay." Silence filled the room. The idea that Lyra might not want to return struck like a knife to Keeler and Syrah's hearts. "No," Keeler said firmly. "She's just a child. She doesn't understand what's happening to her." Ethan stood, pacing the room as he thought. "Maybe. But if I go back in, I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Keeler's eyes darkened with worry. "You're going back." "I have to," Ethan replied without hesitation. "Pulling her partway out isn't enough. If she's not fully here, her condition could get worse." Syrah's voice trembled. "But Ethan, what if you get stuck this time?" Ethan glanced at Lyra's peaceful face. "Then I'll get stuck. I'm not leaving her there." Keeler placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his expression torn between gratitude and fear. "Thank you." Ethan nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. Back in the chamber beneath the medical wing, Ethan settled into the neural link chair once more. The cold metal bands clicked into place around his temples, and the faint hum of energy began to build. Keeler stood by the console, his hands trembling slightly as he activated the machine. "Same as before," Keeler said. "If anything feels wrong." "Don't pull me out," Ethan interrupted. "Not this time. I have to reach her, no matter what." Keeler hesitated but nodded grimly. The hum grew louder, and Ethan's vision faded into the void once more. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was back in the swirling black expanse. The glowing threads stretched endlessly in all directions, but this time, the whispers were louder, closer. Ethan walked forward, following the faint sound of footsteps. "Lyra," he called out. The shadows shifted ahead of him, parting slowly to reveal the small Zerethian girl. She stood with her back to him, gazing into the horizon, where the void seemed to ripple like water. "Lyra," Ethan's voice echoed, but she didn't turn around. He approached carefully, watching the shadows coil around her feet like protective vines. "Lyra, it's time to go home," Ethan said softly. "Your parents are waiting for you." The girl remained silent. Ethan knelt beside her, trying to meet her eyes. "I know this place feels safe, but it's not real. You can't stay here." Finally, Lyra's gaze shifted to meet his. Her eyes shimmered with faint traces of light, but there was sadness in them. "They said I could stay," Lyra whispered. Ethan's heart sank. "Who said that?" Lyra pointed toward the swirling darkness beyond the horizon. Ethan followed her gaze, and as he squinted, the shadows shifted, forming tall, faint figures with glowing eyes. They stood silently, watching from afar like distant guardians. "They said I'm part of this place now," Lyra continued, "that I belong here." Ethan knelt closer, gripping Lyra's small hands gently. "You don't belong here, Lyra. You belong with your family. Your parents love you. They're waiting for you to come home." Tears welled up in Lyra's eyes, but she shook her head. "I'm scared." Ethan's grip tightened. "I know, but you're not alone. I'll walk with you." Lyra hesitated, but when Ethan extended his hand, she slowly took it. As they began walking, the shadows around them stirred. The figures watched, their glowing eyes flickering with silent disapproval. The closer Ethan and Lyra moved to the light, the more the shadows thickened, as if reluctant to let her go. Ethan held Lyra's hand tightly, pushing forward. The light ahead grew brighter, and the whispers faded behind them. As they crossed the threshold, the shadows finally released their grip, dissolving into the darkness. Ethan blinked, and in an instant, he was back in the chamber. His body trembled, sweat dripping down his face as the neural bands detached. Keeler's voice broke the silence. "Ethan." Ethan gasped, his head spinning. "Is she?" "She's awake," Keeler said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She's awake." Ethan staggered to his feet, stumbling toward the room where Lyra lay. Her eyes, wide and filled with life, met his. "Thank you," she whispered, smiling faintly. Ethan returned the smile, relief flooding through him. "Welcome back," he said softly. "The rescue." Ethan leaned against the doorway, his heart still racing from the neural dive. The sight of Lyra awake, her small, fragile body no longer pale and lifeless, should have brought him peace, but as her eyes fluttered open, and she gazed around the room, Ethan could see the weight of what she'd experienced lingering behind them. She wasn't the same child who had wandered too close to the ruins. Keeler knelt beside his daughter, brushing his hand gently over her forehead as tears streamed down his face. Sarah hovered nearby, trembling with relief but hesitant to speak, as if one wrong word might shatter this fragile reunion. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Lyra," he said softly, kneeling next to her bed. Her gaze shifted to him, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's me. You gave us quite a scare." Her small fingers curled slightly against the blanket. I thought I wasn't going to come back." Ethan's chest tightened. "I wasn't going to let that happen." Keeler's hand trembled on Lyra's shoulder. "You saved her, Ethan. We can never repay you." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. Lyra helped." He met the girl's eyes. "You're stronger than you think." Lyra gave a faint nod, but her expression darkened. "The shadows, they didn't want me to leave." Ethan exchanged a glance with Keeler, who shifted uneasily. "I know," Ethan replied carefully. "But they're gone now. You're safe." Lyra hesitated. They weren't angry. They were sad. Ethan frowned. "Sad?" She nodded. "They were lonely. They didn't want to hurt me. They just didn't want to be alone." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The shadows, the ancient guardians of the ruins, weren't mindless constructs. They had emotions, even if faint echoes of them. "I told them I couldn't stay," Lyra continued softly, her voice trembling. "I told them I wanted to go home." Keeler squeezed her hand. "And we're so glad you did." But Ethan's mind was already spinning. If the shadows could feel loneliness, what else might the ruins contain? What other pieces of forgotten consciousness might still linger, waiting for someone like Lyra to stumble upon them? As Ethan rose to his feet, Keeler followed, pulling him aside. "She's awake," Keeler whispered, his voice still trembling with emotion. "That's all that matters. But this isn't over, is it?" Ethan's eyes lingered on the girl, who lay quietly now, her breathing steady. "No," he admitted. "Whatever's down there, it's still watching." Keeler's expression darkened. "The colony leaders won't want to hear that." "They'll have to," Ethan replied firmly. "This is bigger than just Lyra. The ruins are active. The shadows aren't gone. They let her go." Keeler's grip tightened on Ethan's arm. "What if they don't let the next one go?" Ethan met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "Then we make sure no one else goes near those ruins. I'll talk to the colony council myself if I have to." Keeler nodded solemnly. As Ethan turned back to Lyra, she gave him a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered. He smiled in return. "Get some rest, kid. You've been through enough." But as he stepped away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The shadows had released Lyra, but they were still waiting, just beneath the surface, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before someone else heard the call from the ruins. The aftermath. The colony felt different in the days following Lyra's return. The streets were quiet, but it wasn't the peaceful silence Ethan had grown used to. It felt heavy, like the air itself carried the weight of unspoken fears. Ethan walked through the market square, watching as Zerethians avoided his gaze. Whispers followed him, half-hidden conversations drifting through the air as he passed. They say he went into the ruins. No one comes back from there. He brought the girl back, but at what cost? Ethan pretended not to notice. The colony's unease didn't surprise him. Zerethians were cautious by nature, and the ruins had been a forbidden place for generations. The fact that he'd returned, twice, and pulled Lyra out wasn't just strange to them. It was unsettling. At the far end of the square, Keeler waited near the council chambers. His posture was tense, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. When Ethan approached, Keeler gave a faint nod. "They're ready for you," Keeler said, though his tone lacked confidence. Ethan sighed. "How bad is it?" Keeler hesitated. "They're afraid, Ethan. Some of the council want to seal the ruins permanently. Others want to send a team to destroy them." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Destroy them? They don't even know what's down there." Keeler glanced around nervously. "That's the point. They don't want to know." Ethan clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "I'll talk to them." As Ethan stepped into the council chamber, a semicircle of Zerethian leaders awaited him. Their robes shimmered faintly under the room's bioluminescent lights, but their expressions were anything but warm. The head of the council, a tall Zerethian named Errol, raised a hand. "Ethan," Errol began, his voice formal. "We understand you've done a great service for Keeler's family, but there are concerns that your actions may have awakened something dangerous." Ethan met Errol's gaze head-on. "With all due respect, something was already awake. I didn't cause this. I just found out about it before anyone else." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Errol's sharp eyes narrowed slightly. "The ruins have remained untouched for centuries. Why now?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "Because Lyra heard something, and she wasn't imagining it. There's something alive down there, some remnant of the builders, and it's not hostile, at least not yet." Errol's expression darkened. "Not yet." Ethan crossed his arms. "The shadows I saw weren't trying to hurt her. They were protecting her. I think whatever's down there is lonely, forgotten." Another council member, an elder Zerethian with deep purple skin, leaned forward. "And what happens when the next child hears this call?" Ethan's gaze flickered toward Keeler, who stood silently by the entrance. "We keep them away," Ethan replied. "But destroying the ruins isn't the answer. We don't know what we're dealing with. If you try to destroy it, you could wake something worse." Errol's eyes narrowed. "You speak as though you understand this force." Ethan took a slow breath. "I don't, but I know this much. Lyra survived because the shadows let her go. They didn't have to. That tells me there's still hope for dialogue. Maybe we can learn from whatever's down there." Silence filled the chamber as the council exchanged glances. Errol finally leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You would risk the safety of this colony to study the ruins." Ethan's eyes hardened. "I would risk it to prevent a disaster. Ignoring this won't make it go away." For a long moment, Errol said nothing. Then, slowly he nodded. "We will not destroy the ruins, but they will remain sealed, and no one, human or Zerethian, will be allowed near them." Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. "That's all I ask." As the council dismissed him, Keeler caught up to Ethan outside. "You convinced them," Keeler said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." Ethan exhaled, glancing up at the colony's twin moons overhead. "Neither was I." Keeler's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the faint outline of the ruins could still be seen in the distance. Do you really think this is over? Ethan watched the dark silhouette of the ruins for a long moment. No, he admitted, but I don't think it's a battle we need to fight yet. Whatever's down there, it's waiting, watching. Keeler placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. If it calls again, will you answer? Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. I don't think it'll be me it calls next time. Keeler frowned. Who, then? Ethan's eyes flickered toward the stars, and his smile grew. Lyra. But next time, she won't be afraid. As the colony lights flickered to life around them, Ethan walked away, knowing this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and the builder's secrets were far from fully uncovered. But for now, at least one little girl had made it home, and that was enough.